we begin with breaking news from the courts. Peter Nygard has been found guilty of 4 counts of sexual assault. The jury delivered its verdict late this morning after deliberating the case since late Wednesday. Again, Nygard has been found guilty, or rather not guilty, of 1 count of sexual assault and also now not guilty of 1 count of forcible confinement. Nygard's defense lawyer spoke about the verdict. That's Brian Greenspan.
So the jury has spoken, and we now have to review the rulings that were made to determine whether or not there will be further proceedings and whether or not an appeal will be taken. As you've all seen, Mr. Nygard is frail, has numerous health challenges, and that will be part of the position taken when we come back in a number of weeks with respect to what sentence would be appropriate in the circumstances. And right now it's a matter of considering the outcome and considering whether the rulings will dictate an appeal.
And for reaction, let's bring in Joseph Newberg, criminal defense lawyer at Newberger and Partners LLP. So again, thank you very much for taking time to speak with us today. Regarding that sentencing, November 21st is going to come back. What's going to go into this?
So I think eventually what will happen is the 21st is a rather early date. So a further date will be set most likely in January for a sentencing. In that time, Mr. Greenspan and his team will review exactly what he said, the rulings, the instructions to the jury, the evidence, and determine if an appeal should be launched. And if they decide, then they will file a notice of appeal and line it up with the sentencing so that it'll be done fairly swiftly. You don't want to delay it.
Nygard is 82 years old. What's going to be taken into consideration when it comes to sentencing?
Well, certainly his age and his health will be a factor. There are a number of health issues he is facing. So legitimately, you have to take into consideration his age. These were offenses that are historical in nature, and it took many decades for them to come forward. So his frailty is something that the court must take into consideration. The court, however, will consider the impact of these offenses on the complainants or the victims. Now that a jury has made a finding, they will put forward victim impact statements, and the court will have to consider very carefully how this has impacted them, and then the court will consider what the range of sentences for these types of offenses. And,
you know, when it comes to the court, we heard from one of Nygard's sons earlier, Kai Bickle, and one of the things that he said while speaking to the media is that, quote, you know, what we've seen is voices being silenced. What do you make of all of that?
I'm not sure. You know, I'm sure this is an emotional time for him, and you know, somebody, you know, his father at 82 years of age, having to go through this now at this stage is very difficult. So it's an emotional response. But you know, it's not uncommon to have historical cases in Canada where complainants may not come forward with allegations for very real reasons. And so whether his meaning that his father's voice was heard in the trial or not may be something he's driving at, because trying to give evidence of something that happened 2-3 decades ago or even longer is very difficult.
So that leads into my next question, you know, voices being silenced, and then we have the victims coming forward. When it comes to sentencing, what role, you know, do the impact statements have, especially in a case like this where, you know, a lot of it is based, well, you know, pretty much all of it is based on, you know, what has happened to the survivors, the victims? Yeah, so it has a very significant factor. So a court has to consider the victim impact statements and what has been the emotional, psychological trauma that they have endured, how that has impacted them over time, how that may still impact them in the future. The court will, you know, consider that as overall one of the major factors in sentencing, but they also have to look at other principles like general deterrence and denunciation and factors like that, because the courts want to act appropriately in cases where there is sexual abuse. And as we wrap up, what impact do you see this case having on similar cases which may arise in the future? Well, if you're talking in general,
This is not the first time a historical sexual case has gone forward. This has much more notoriety because Mr. Nygard was well known in the public for his very successful business and empire. But it means, I think, like many cases that proceed that don't get this publicity, that people who have been sexually abused should come forward with their allegations, speak to the police, and give statements. Courts will hear them, and they will have a fair trial. I think it's very important that we maintain balance with all these cases and ensure that we always focus on the evidence. And when a jury has spoken, that we focus also on the impact for these victims.
Joseph Neuberger, criminal defense lawyer at Neuberger and Partners LLP. Thank you for your time this Sunday afternoon.
Take care.